Sarah had always loved the peaceful mornings in her suburban neighborhood, the soft hum of distant lawnmowers, birds chirping in the trees, and the gentle sunlight spilling over her driveway created a comforting routine. She stepped out of her bedroom, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy her weekend before the usual hustle began. But today was different. As she approached the window overlooking the street, her heart skipped a beat. Two massive tow trucks rumbled noisily down the block, their engines growling like beasts invading her quiet world. They slowed to a stop right in front of her house. Sarah blinked. No warning, no flyers, no phone calls, just the rumble of heavy machinery looming ominously over her pristine driveway. She rushed outside, gripping her coffee tighter than ever. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Tow truck drivers had already begun hooking up her cars. Her two spotless vehicles parked perfectly within her driveway lines, just as the HOA rules allowed. She shouted at them, but they barely glanced up. "You can't tow these cars. They're parked legally," she yelled, panic twisting her voice. One of the drivers gave a curt glance and replied, "We have orders from the HOA. We're just doing our job." His tone was flat, almost robotic, like he was reading from a script. "Orders? From the HOA? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Sarah's voice cracked with frustration. "I've never been warned about anything." The second driver finished hooking up the second car and started signaling the first truck to pull away. Sarah frantically ran to her neighbor's porch to see if anyone else had noticed. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man with sharp eyes, shook his head in disbelief. "Never seen anything like this," he muttered. "They just showed up and started towing." Sarah's mind raced. How could this happen without any warning? The HOA had always been strict, but fair. Or so she thought. She tried calling the HOA president's number, but only reached voicemail. She texted the community group chat, but there was silence. The tow trucks began moving slowly, each car disappearing around the corner like a thief in the night. Sarah stood frozen, helpless as her prized vehicles vanished. Her heart pounded wildly. She had always followed every HOA rule to the letter. Had she missed something? Was this some kind of mistake? Minutes later, as the tow trucks disappeared from view, a small envelope was slipped under her front door. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a terse letter stamped with the HOA's official seal. The letter read, "Dear homeowner, due to violations of community safety standards, your vehicles have been towed effective immediately. Further communication will be provided. Thank you for your cooperation." Sarah reread the words, disbelief turning to anger. Community safety standards? What the hell does that even mean? She paced back and forth, heart racing with dread and confusion. She felt betrayed and powerless. Just as she was about to call the police, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "You should have complied. This is bigger than you think." Her breath caught in her throat. What was going on? Why would the HOA act like this? And who was warning her? The peaceful morning she once knew had shattered in an instant. A quiet suburban routine was replaced by fear and suspicion. Sarah knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at the empty driveway that once held her two cars, the black sedan and silver SUV she'd painstakingly kept spotless for years. The void felt surreal, like someone had ripped the foundation from beneath her feet. She ran her fingers through her hair, overwhelmed by disbelief. She replayed the morning in her mind. The roaring tow trucks, the cold, indifferent drivers, the terse letter tucked beneath her door. None of it made sense. How could the HOA justify seizing her legally parked cars? What community safety standards had she violated without even knowing? Her phone buzzed again. A new text. Check your mailbox. Soon. Sarah's pulse quickened. Someone was watching. Or trying to communicate with her. But who? Was this a threat or a warning? She hesitated, but then grabbed her jacket and stepped outside, feeling the chill of the early morning air seep into her bones. She walked over to the mailbox at the end of her driveway. Inside was a small package wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. Inside the package lay a USB drive and a note scrawled in hurried handwriting. The HOA is not what it seems. Look deeper. A shiver crawled up her spine. Back inside, Sarah plugged the USB drive into her laptop. A folder appeared, filled with files and images. Everything from photos of her neighborhood's board members to scanned documents marked confidential. One file caught her eye. A spreadsheet listing multiple addresses, dates, and amounts of money exchanged. Another file was an email thread between board members discussing enforcement actions and removing obstacles. Sarah's eyes widened. This wasn't just a simple parking dispute. It was something far more sinister. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. She jumped, heart pounding. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole. No one was there, only a small envelope rested on the welcome mat. She picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a single folded paper with one sentence written in bold typed letters. Your cars are gone, but the truth can't be towed away. A mixture of fear and determination surged through Sarah. Whoever was sending these messages wanted her to dig deeper. But why? And could she trust these mysterious clues? Later that day, Sarah reached out to her neighbors, hoping someone else had received a similar letter or experienced the towing nightmare. To her surprise, many hushed voices told of strange incidents. Cars towed without warning, notices mysteriously disappearing, and some residents too scared to speak up. One neighbor, Mark, confided in Sarah that the HOA meetings had become nearly impossible to attend lately, with strict security and closed-door policies. Feels like they're hiding something, he whispered. Sarah realized she wasn't alone, but that didn't ease her growing anxiety. If the HOA had this much control, what else were they capable of? Her phone buzzed again. A call this time from an unknown number. Who is this? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. A low, distorted voice replied, Stay out of this, Sarah. Some things are better left buried. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Her hands shook. The warning was clear and chilling. Sarah stared out the window, her mind racing with questions. Who was orchestrating this campaign against her? What dark secrets did the HOA hide beneath its polished surface? And most terrifying of all, was she now caught in something far bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined? Her quiet suburban life was unraveling, and the vanishing of her cars was only the first clue in a much larger mystery. She had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Determined to uncover how the HOA could have legally taken her cars, Sarah plunged into the mountain of paperwork she'd gathered over the years. She pulled out her copy of the HOA's bylaws, carefully bookmarked and well-worn from previous reference. Yet, as she flipped through the pages, nothing jumped out. No mention of sudden towing, no clause justifying seizing vehicles without warning. Frustration mounted. If the rules she'd been following her entire residency didn't include such harsh measures, where had this authority come from? Sarah turned to the HOA website, scouring every update, newsletter, and community memo. Then she found it, buried deep in an obscure section labeled Emergency Safety Provisions. a vague passage she'd never seen before. The board reserves the right to remove any vehicles deemed a threat to the community's safety, or aesthetics without prior notice. That was it. That was the justification they'd used to tow her cars. But this rule hadn't appeared in any previous newsletter or community email. It was as if it had suddenly materialized. A hidden weapon, lurking in the fine print. Sarah's mind raced. Had the HOA quietly slipped this provision in without homeowner approval? She remembered the last annual meeting, the one where attendance was low and the agenda seemed rushed. Was this rule passed then? Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark, the neighbor she'd spoken to before. You're not the only one caught off guard. They used this clause on at least 3 other homes. Last month, all sudden, no warnings, Sarah felt the walls closing in. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a coordinated effort. But why? What was driving the HOA board to wield this emergency clause so aggressively? Her search led her to a community forum online where a few residents whispered about a recent power shift on the board. Newcomers rumored to have ties with real estate developers. Could the towing be part of a plan to pressure homeowners to sell their properties at a discount? Feeling the weight of the mystery, Sarah called the HOA president's office. After several rings, a curt voice answered, "Yes. Hi, this is Sarah Thompson. I'd like clarification about the recent towing of my vehicles. According to the bylaws, I don't see any prior notice required for such actions." There was a pause. Then the voice said, "The board's decision is final. For safety reasons, enforcement must be immediate in some cases." Sarah pressed, "Further, could you please specify what safety concerns my legally parked cars posed? I never received a notice or warning." The line went silent, then disconnected abruptly. Sarah's blood ran cold. The official answer was cold, evasive, and closed. It was clear the board didn't want to explain. Or maybe they couldn't. She started piecing together the puzzle. Strange new clauses. A silent crackdown on homeowners. Evasive board, members, and mysterious texts warning her to back off. The truth was hidden behind layers of silence and intimidation. Sarah knew she was no longer just fighting for her cars. She was fighting for transparency and justice in a neighborhood that seemed to be quietly losing its soul. As night fell, Sarah sat alone at her desk, the flickering screen displaying the emergency safety provisions section. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She glanced through the peephole. No one. But taped to the door was a single piece of paper, bold letters handwritten. "Some truths are better left undiscovered." Her hands trembled. The game had just gotten darker. Sarah realized one undeniable fact. The HOA's mysterious new rule was no accident. It was part of something much bigger. And whatever came next, she was ready to face it head on. Sarah had hoped the next HOA meeting would bring answers, or at least some clarity. Instead, it felt like stepping into a shadowy fortress. She arrived at the community center early, clutching a folder filled with evidence, screenshots, letters, and photos. The large glass doors were locked tight with a private meeting, and sign taped on the entrance. 2 security guards in dark suits flanked the entrance, their eyes scanning every arriving homeowner with cold scrutiny. Sarah approached the guards, flashing her ID. "I'm here for the HOA meeting," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. One guard eyed her suspiciously. "This meeting is by invitation only," he said flatly. "You're not on the list." Sarah's heart sank. She wasn't alone. A few other neighbors also lingered outside, murmuring in disbelief. Whispers floated. "What's going on inside? Why the secrecy?" She felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, as if unseen eyes were watching every move. The once open community meetings had become exclusive, secretive gatherings, a far cry from the open forum she remembered. Determined not to be shut out, Sarah slipped away to find the HOA president's office nearby. The hallway was dimly lit, the walls lined with old community photos. She knocked softly, but no answer came. Just as she turned to leave, she heard muffled voices behind a door down the hall. Curiosity overtook caution. She crept closer, pressing her ear to the wood. "She's stirring up trouble," one voice whispered harshly. "If we don't act, others will follow." Another voice, colder and more menacing, responded. "We can't let her disrupt the plan." The towing was necessary to set an example. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't about safety or community standards. It was a calculated move to silence dissenters. Her mind flashed back to the anonymous texts and mysterious threats. This was bigger than a parking dispute. The HOA board had transformed into an unyielding force, wielding its power behind locked doors. As she pulled away from the door, a shadow flickered in the hallway. She ducked behind a corner, heart pounding, just as the hallway lights flickered and dimmed. When she dared to peek out again, the corridor was empty. Back outside, neighbors exchanged anxious glances. Mark approached her quietly. "They're hiding something," he said. "I've been to the last 2 meetings. The atmosphere has changed. It's like they're running a private club instead of a community board." Sarah nodded. "And it feels like anyone asking questions is being watched. Or worse." Just then, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." The message was chilling. No room for negotiation, but instead of fear, Sarah felt a growing fire ignite within her. She looked around at the quiet street, the familiar houses bathed in late afternoon sunlight. This was her home, her community, and she refused to be intimidated. Determined to expose the truth, she started organizing a small group of trusted neighbors who felt the same unease. They would demand transparency. They would challenge the board's shadowy tactics. But as night fell, Sarah knew the fight was far from over. Somewhere behind those locked doors, unseen enemies were plotting their next move, and Sarah was right in their crosshairs. Sarah sat in the sterile office of a local attorney, clutching the folder stuffed with documents and digital evidence. Across from her, the lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, leaned back, reading through her files with a grave expression. "From what you've shown me, Sarah, the HOA's actions are highly questionable," he said finally. "Towing your cars without prior notice or due process is potentially illegal, especially since you've followed the rules as written." Relief flooded Sarah's chest. "So I have a case." Mr. Reynolds nodded cautiously. "You do. But be warned, HOAs are powerful entities. They have resources and can be ruthless. If you push back, expect resistance. Sometimes that resistance crosses the line." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He glanced around the office, voice dropping to a whisper. "I've handled a few cases where homeowners faced intimidation, threatening calls, vandalism, even legal harassment when they tried to expose corrupt boards." Sarah swallowed hard. She had already received anonymous threats, but hearing it confirmed by a professional made it real and more terrifying. Back home that evening, Sarah sat alone, the lawyer's warning echoing in her mind. Just as she considered the risks of continuing, her phone rang sharply. The number was unknown. Her fingers hesitated before answering. "Sarah," a distorted voice hissed. "You need to stop this now." "Who is this?" she demanded, heart pounding. You're meddling where you don't belong. The HOA isn't just some neighborhood committee. Walk away or face the consequences." The line went dead. Sarah's breath hitched. She stared at the phone, hands trembling. The anonymous message wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a threat. Her thoughts drifted back to the sealed envelope, taped to her door. Some truths are better left undiscovered. Now, the ominous voice on the phone made it clear she was stepping into dangerous territory. Yet despite the fear gnawing at her, Sarah's resolve hardened. She refused to be bullied. Over the next days, she grew more cautious, watching for unfamiliar cars or faces around her home. But she also intensified her efforts, organizing meetings with neighbors who had similar stories of intimidation and unfair treatment. Mark, her neighbor and ally, confided in her. "They're scared of what you're uncovering. The HOA's grip isn't just about rules. It's about control." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just about her cars. It was about fighting an invisible but ruthless power choking their community. One evening, as she prepared for a neighborhood meeting in her living room, a sudden knock shattered the quiet. Opening the door, Sarah found a plain manila envelope lying on the porch. No return address. Inside was a single photo, a blurry image of her standing at her window, looking out at the street. Her heart pounded. They were watching her. The message was unmistakable. She wasn't just fighting the HOA anymore. She was being targeted. But Sarah knew that retreat wasn't an option. With every threat, her determination grew fiercer. She looked out into the night, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The battle for her home and her rights had only just begun. The photograph haunted Sarah's thoughts as she paced her living room. The blurry image of herself, captured through her window, was a chilling reminder that someone was watching, tracking her every move. The message was clear. Her fight had made her a target, but fear wasn't going to silence her. Sarah knew she needed allies, people who felt the creeping unease that had settled over the neighborhood. She started reaching out quietly, one by one, knocking on doors and speaking in hushed tones. "I'm not the only one," Mrs. Lee whispered behind tightly closed blinds. "They've been towing cars, slashing tires, and intimidating families for months. We just didn't know how to fight back." At every home, Sarah found others with stories eerily similar to hers. Neighbors whose vehicles had vanished overnight or who'd been shunned for asking too many questions. The more she listened, the clearer it became. The HOA's reign of fear stretched far wider than she imagined. One evening, as Sarah met with a small group in her basement, a sudden noise outside froze them mid-discussion. They exchanged wary glances. Sarah peeked out the window and saw a black SUV idling a few houses down. Windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. It wasn't a usual sight in their quiet neighborhood. Mark whispered, "That's not just someone passing through. They've been around a lot lately." Her pulse quickened. Were those the watchers? The enforcers? In the following days, Sarah and her allies started documenting strange occurrences. Unfamiliar cars parked near homes, sudden power outages, and even the appearance of small cameras, mounted in odd places, on street lamps, inside trees, even attached discreetly to mailboxes. Sarah's heart pounded as she spotted one such camera just outside her own front yard. It was small, almost invisible if you weren't looking closely. She recorded its location and took photos, sending everything to Mr. Reynolds, her lawyer. "We may have grounds for legal action against harassment," he replied. "But you have to be careful. These people are organized and dangerous." Despite the risks, Sarah refused to back down. The neighbors rallied. forming a grassroots group demanding transparency from the HOA. They drafted petitions, planned community forums, and spread the word about their collective fight. One afternoon, while walking home from a meeting, Sarah noticed a man in a dark hoodie, standing near a parked car, watching her. When their eyes met, he quickly slipped away down an alley. Fear mixed with determination. Someone was trying to intimidate her, to scare her into silence. But Sarah's voice only grew louder. She and her neighbors organized a public forum at the local library, inviting all homeowners and media outlets. Flyers were distributed, social media buzzed with support, and for the first time, many residents felt hope. The night of the forum arrived, and the room filled with anxious, expectant faces. As Sarah stepped up to speak, she glanced at the crowd. Familiar neighbors, weary but resolute. Together, they were no longer isolated. The camera hidden in the shadows might be watching. But Sarah was ready to be seen. She took a deep breath and began. We're here because our community is being threatened. Not by crime or outsiders, but by those who are supposed to protect us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. As the evening unfolded, Sarah revealed the documents, the photos, the messages, pieces of a puzzle pointing to an HOA abusing its power for reasons no one wanted to admit. But just as the forum reached its peak, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Gasps and startled cries echoed. Then, the emergency lights clicked on, dim and flickering. Sarah's phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. A message appeared on the screen. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. Be careful what you wish for. The room fell silent. Sarah's heart pounded louder than ever. The fight for truth had awakened forces far more dangerous than she imagined. And now, there was no turning back. The emergency lights hummed weakly, casting eerie shadows across the faces in the dimly lit room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Concern mixed with unease. The warning text on Sarah's phone lingered in the air like a ghost. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. Be careful what you wish for. But Sarah refused to let fear dominate her. She scanned the room, eyes landing on a figure, sitting quietly in the back. A man she hadn't seen before. As the forum wrapped up, the crowd slowly dispersed. Whispers of suspicion following the flickering outage. Sarah approached the stranger. Cautiously, I don't believe we've met, she said. He extended a hand. Tom Harrison. I'm new to the neighborhood, but I know a thing or two about HOAs. Sarah eyed him warily. How do you mean? Tom smiled faintly. Let's just say I've been involved in a few battles with boards like this before. They can get ugly. Her curiosity piqued. Sarah invited him for coffee at the nearby cafe. There, Tom shared a startling story. He'd once helped expose an HOA scheme similar to hers. Illegal towing, intimidation, and quiet land grabs for developers. But that was years ago, he said, lowering his voice. This neighborhood situation, it's worse. The new board has ties to powerful interests. They're using fear and secrecy to control residents. Sarah's heart pounded. Could this outsider really be an ally? Tom pulled out a small folder from his bag, sliding it across the table. I did some digging before moving here. I found records of property sales, suspiciously timed with recent board changes. The HOA's tightening grip isn't just about parking rules. It's about pushing homeowners out for profit. The pieces clicked in Sarah's mind. The sudden new emergency towing rule, the secretive meetings, the anonymous threats. Together, they devised a risky plan. Gather undeniable proof of the HOA's illegal activities and present it to the county authorities and media. But there was a catch. Tom warned, we'll need inside access. Someone who can get us board meeting minutes, financial statements, emails, anything showing corruption, Sarah thought of Mark, her neighbor who'd mentioned the increased security and secrecy at meetings. They reached out discreetly. After days of cautious back and forth, Mark agreed to help. He'd smuggled out a USB drive containing confidential HOA documents during the last meeting. Among the files were financial records showing large payments to unknown contractors, sudden spikes in fines against homeowners, and meeting transcripts hinting at plans to pressure residents into selling. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but their actions had consequences. That night, her front porch light flickered violently before going out altogether. A faint scratching noise near the bushes sent her heart racing. She peered through the window and spotted two figures disappearing into the shadows. Sarah texted Tom and Mark immediately. "We're being watched," she wrote. "They know we're onto them." Tom replied quickly, "Stay alert. We're close, but we have to be smart." The tension ratcheted higher as they prepared to expose the HOA's secrets. Sarah realized this was more than a neighborhood dispute. It was a dangerous game of power and control, and the players were willing to do anything to win. The night air was thick with tension as Sarah, Tom, and Mark gathered in her dimly lit living room. The evidence they had collected, the financial records, secret meeting transcripts, and photos of surveillance cameras, was compiled into a dossier that could dismantle the HOA's carefully constructed facade. "This goes straight to the county officials and the press tomorrow," Tom said, his voice firm. "We're exposing the corruption, no matter what." Sarah nodded, but inside she was tense. The threats, the watchful eyes, the flickering lights, all warnings of what might come next. Yet the risk was worth it. Their community needed the truth. The next morning, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "This is HOA President Karen Fields," said the voice, deceptively calm. "We need to talk." Sarah's heart skipped. "Why now?" Karen's voice dropped slightly. "Because you've stirred up more than you realize. You think you're exposing corruption? You don't know the whole story." Sarah felt a chill. "Then tell me." "Because everything I've found points to a campaign of intimidation and greed." There was a pause. "Meet me tonight in the park pavilion. Alone. We need to settle this." Sarah debated the risk, but her desire for answers pushed her forward. That evening, under the soft glow of the pavilion's lights, she met Karen. Karen's expression was unreadable. "You think you're the victim here, but what you don't know is that our hands are tied. The developer, he's blackmailing the board." Sarah's eyes widened. "Blackmail? What do you mean?" Karen sighed. "Years ago, the developer lent the HOA a large sum to renovate community areas. If we don't comply with his plans, selling off properties for commercial use, we lose everything. He's threatened to call in the loan and bankrupt us." Sarah's mind reeled. The towing, the intimidation. It was a desperate attempt to force homeowners to sell, so the developer could take over. "But why threaten me?" Sarah asked. Karen looked away, ashamed. "Because you refused to play along. We were ordered to make an example of you." Sarah's anger surged. "So you sacrificed me to save yourselves." Karen nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, but we were trapped." As Sarah processed the revelation, a sudden noise interrupted them. Footsteps approaching. Tom and Mark emerged from the shadows, flashing badges. "We've been investigating the developer's schemes for months," Tom said, "and with this evidence, we have enough to bring charges against the HOA board and the developer." Karen's face paled. "You don't understand. This will ruin the community." Tom shook his head. "No. Corruption ruins communities. Truth, saves them. With the board's secrets laid bare and the developer's threats exposed, the tide turned. The county launched an investigation, and media outlets picked up the story. Neighbors rallied, no longer silent, but empowered. Sarah's cars were returned, and the HOA was restructured, with transparency and fairness at its core. But the experience left a mark, reminding Sarah and her neighbors that vigilance was the price of freedom. And as the sun rose over their quiet streets once more, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She had fought for her home and won.